Hello, everybody, and welcome back to artofdino.com and saveearth.us. And while the algorithm's slightly hot for the first time in pretty much 5 years, I'm going to keep striking a little bit. So I wanted to finish up or do a little more on this video, on this book that we've been talking about lately with the translations. And this part, I'm going to translate the first 12 pages of the official book where the author explains his method for discovering this history, or trying to tackle and trying to discover and uncover our true history. So I think we can all learn a lot from his method, because he kind of breaks it down into different categories of, and then trying to connect them to things that already exist in other parts of the world, takes artifacts. He really breaks the entire process of discovering mysterious lost past down, which again, we can all really utilize in our own world as we do this as well. And so this is a perfect introduction. As I'll dive a little deeper in the book, I'll finish the translations of the artwork after this video, and then I'll dive into some of the top picks and top amazing finds that I've found in this book. But this part is absolutely crucial, and I think everybody out there can learn from it. So I'm going to read these 11 pages translated here. I've got some AI arts in the middle, and then the end of it will end with all the artwork that's found in the book, the second half of which I will translate in the next video. So it's all very encompassing. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get cracking. Page 1, and it's called, this whole section, the very first section, is called Purpose and Design of This Work. So again, so important for all of us, because this guy did what we all want to do, and he did it at an earlier time when there was more information. If we were able to access the Smithsonian, the Vatican, and all that stuff, we could take this method that he describes here and be able to do it all, be able to comprehensively discover our truth and our ancient past, which is perfect and needs to be uncovered. So here we go. Purpose and Design of This Work, page 1. For more than 2 centuries since America was discovered, the most European naval powers established numerous colonies there. Many travel writers have sought to describe the temperament and customs of the Americans, and a good number of scholars have carefully endeavored to seek traces of the origins of these people in obscure antiquity. But whatever great care we might attribute to the travelers who make their journeys known, it is nevertheless almost impossible that they could have compiled everything and left no one else with a gleaning. For in the course of time such information has been received that they neither had nor could have, such that without offending them, one can quite reasonably undertake to take up this matter and hope to present something more detailed and noteworthy, which moreover has the charm of being news. As for the scholars who have dealt with this matter, most of their treatises are based only on incomplete and unreliable information. And again, this is in 1752, i752. Remember that. Therefore, for the most part, they cannot be anything other than defective. Their conjectures are so wavering and uncertain that instead of providing explanation, they only arouse doubt in the agreement they find in the barbaric and first part. The learned languages known to them are based on such mutilated words from which one can draw nothing but false conclusions. And that's where we're at now. There's so many more of those now. And these were earlier writers that were doing it. So this guy's deciding, he's clearly knows what he should sift through and what is garbage and what isn't. And so that's very important. During the 5 years as I spent as a missionary among the savages in Canada, I sought to thoroughly understand the temperament and customs of these peoples. In this regard, I was particularly helped by the illustrious insights and experiences of an old Jesuit named Julien Garnier, who, having devoted himself to the missions from his probationary year onwards, lived there for well over 60 years and finally consumed himself in the exercises of pious zeal in a very strict life. He understood the Algonquin language, which is the most widespread in North America, very well. In particular, however, he had a perfect knowledge of the Huron language and the 5 different dialects of the Iroquois, among whom he spent almost most of his life. From my association with this missionary with whom I lived in close friendship, I learned almost everything I will say here about the savage Americans. So that's amazing. That's a very trustworthy source. I have also read the reports made known by various writers at different times, and especially by those missionaries who through their apostolic labors had inaugurated these missions, some of whom were themselves fortunate enough to shed their blood under the most cruel tortures among these barbarians, whose true salvation they sought solely for themselves. I have not contented myself with merely learning about the mental disposition of savages and informing myself about their habits and customs. I have also taken particular pains to find traces of remote antiquity in this regard. Therefore, I have carefully reviewed those oldest writers who have dealt with the customs, sites, and practices of peoples with which they were somewhat familiar. I wonder if a lot of those books are gone, but maybe not, I don't know. I have made a comparison between both customs, and I assure you that just as the ancient writers have shed some light on me in venturing some fortunate conjectures regarding savages, so too have the customs of savages helped me to understand much of what the ancients cite in their writings and to explain many passages more clearly. Perhaps by making these present treaties known, I will be so fortunate that I will provide those who are far more well-read in the ancient writers with some discoveries which they will be able to explore further and more thoroughly. Indeed, perhaps I will discover a vein of mine which, under their hands, can yield rich yields. I hope that they will see even further than I have been able to, and will endeavor to give a more precise form and the appropriate scope to many things which I only touch upon in passing. Some of my conjectures will indeed appear, and of themselves, to be of no particular importance, but if they are reconciled with one another, they will constitute a whole whose parts, through the connections they have with one another, will be supported jointly. This guy is great, because this is exactly what we are all doing today. We're all like, there's a bunch of nonsense, and we're all trying to sift through it, hoping that one of us, this is why I do these videos. I'm hoping that one thing, that if I'm learning it and I'm sharing it with you all, I'm hoping that one of you all will connect it, and you guys always do in the comments, which is why I love doing this and why I can't stop, is because it helps my own education by helping you all, and sharing information with each other is the only way to get this thing solved. So the knowledge of the customs and habits of different peoples certainly contains something so pleasant and charming that some have been moved by it to lay the foundation for a complete poem. Its purpose is to make known the wisdom of Ilus, his hero, who, when after the siege of Troy, he found himself permanently removed from his native Ithaca by the wrath of Neptune, took advantage of his errant ship nautical voyage by making the most detailed inquiries into the customs of the nations among whom the raging winds forced him to land, and then selected from each of them what was good and praiseworthy. Neither the travelers who share news with the world, nor those who read it, must have a vain curiosity and dry knowledge of things as their focus. Rather, one must learn about other people's customs solely in order to improve one's own. One encounters something everywhere from which you can draw inspiration. I love this guy. The religious zeal that drives a missionary to venture across the sea must also serve as his motive and guide his pen when, in idle hours, he records the discoveries he has made and the knowledge he has acquired. This must be the ultimate goal of a worker of the gospel, and it is also what I have endeavored to direct all my work and diligence towards. So again, I'm not sure if this guy is a Jesuit or what his connection to the Jesuits is, or if it's just he met them. He did his missionary work is different. He's discovering other things. I'm not exactly positive on that, but I will say when he says one encounters something everywhere from which one can draw inspiration. My parents always loved travel, and I've been traveling since I was pretty young. I haven't in recent years because I've been broke, but when I was a kid and my parents were paying for my trips, I was going to all different places, meeting amazing people, and I discovered this at a very young age, that talking to people in these places was amazing. I've had some incredible conversations with people all over the world, and that's where I learned some of the most important, amazing things. Just people that you'd never even think you'd encounter, but you do in the course of life, in the path of your world, and everything that they say is important. Everything you overhear is important, and that's all based on the everything is perfect, which I think this guy can relate to. So here we go. I have noticed with much annoyance in many reports that those who describe the customs of barbaric peoples have portrayed them to us as people in whom not the slightest trace of religion, no knowledge of God, and no hint of any worship can be found. I agree with him. I hate writings like that. They have presented them to us as people who had neither laws nor an external civil constitution, nor the slightest form of government. In a word, as creatures in whom almost nothing but the human form could be found. This error is common even among missionaries and many such men who, on the one hand, have written with too much haste about things with which they were not yet sufficiently familiar, and on the other have not foreseen the evil conclusions that can be drawn from a claim so detrimental to religion. For although these authors contradict themselves in their published works, and at the same time, when they say that these barbarians have neither deities nor religious worship, they also cite things that foresee a deity and regular worship. As Bayle himself had noted, the result is that many a reader is immediately captivated by their first exposition disposition and becomes accustomed to forming such a concept of savages that they cannot be easily distinguished from irrational beasts. And I'm chiming in here, and that is exactly right, and that is what so many people do, and it's an ego thing, and that happens everywhere today. People that think that they are above other people will talk down to them, but in actuality, they won't be able to understand. They'll never be able to fathom it. It's like almost with DMT or with a psychedelic. Someone that has never experienced a mushroom trip or a DMT experience will be able to would see someone on those things and be like, wow, that person's weird, or that person's doing something that doesn't really make sense. Like, what the heck's wrong with that person? They're definitely below me in quality. But in actuality, that person's on another plane of existence that other person observing them can't even fathom. And that's what I think about every time I hear a lot of these takes that are like this from a higher perspective, that's not a falsely higher perspective, and looking down at people that are probably doing something that's more beautiful and more connected to nature than anyone can even fathom. And so it's great. Civilized, that quote unquote, is not necessarily perfect, not necessarily spiritually anything. You can be spiritually just foolish and nothing, while also claiming or being successful in this modern world. So they don't go hand in hand. This guy nails it. But what beyond this is not a strong argument presented to the atheists, for one of the strongest proofs of the necessity and reality of religion that we can see against them consists in the general agreement among all peoples with regard to the recognition of a supreme being and his worship, and indeed to such an extent that it can be inferred that one recognizes his supremacy and considers it necessary to take refuge in him. This argument would, however, fall away if it were the case that a multitude of different nations were found to have become so bestial that they did not have even the slightest concept of a deity and the established obligations of a due veneration of them among themselves. For the atheist immediately seems to be right when he concludes thus: if almost an entire world of peoples can be found who have no religion, then the religion found among other nations is nothing other than a work of human ingenuity and a device of the legislators, who invented it to keep peoples in order through fear, as the mother of superstition. Ding, 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 ding. That's what pretty much has happened for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's ramped up today like never before. They don't even want us looking at the stars or the sky anymore. Keep that in mind. But in order that religion may benefit from every advantage that arises from such an important fact as the general agreement of all peoples, and in order that all atheists may be deprived of all opportunity to attack it on this side, it will be necessary to overthrow the false concepts that such authors have imparted about savages, since this impression can provide sufficient grounds for a detrimental prejudice. It is not unknown to me that in modern times people have sought to refute the proof derived from the general agreement of all peoples in the recognition of a deity, and to pretend that this general agreement could also be capable of error. Nevertheless, the sophisms and subtleties of a few individuals who have either no religion at all, or at least a suspect religion, are not of such a nature that they should shake such a truth, which has been recognized even by the heathens, has also been accepted without contradiction at all times, and which must be accepted as a fundamental principle. It is therefore important to demonstrate this agreement of opinion among all peoples by showing that no nation, no matter how wild, is found without religion and without certain customs. I also flatter myself that I have made this matter so clear that hopefully no doubt will remain, unless one wants to be completely blind with seeing eyes. This guy's great. Those peoples who are called barbarians not only have one religion, but this very religion also has such similarity with that of earlier times, and with what in antiquity was called the orgy of Bacchus, and the murder of the gods, and the mysteries of Osiris and Isis, that one will soon conclude that they both have the same principles and the same disposition. Wow. In terms of religion, there is hardly anything older in pagan antiquity than these divine mysteries and orgia. This constituted the entire religion of the Phrygians, Egyptians, and early Cretans. These considered themselves the first peoples of the soil of earth, and consequently the first founders of this great worship, which was subsequently transmitted by them to all peoples and spread over the entire earth, far beyond this realm, far beyond the poles, Keep in mind, we are just a tiny speck on a massive plane. But because a dark and gloomy gulf of many centuries has existed between the originators of this religion and those who have written about it, a gulf in which the writers did not enter until the times of corruption, and when they had already been obscured by innumerable fables, it has been impossible for them to ascend to the times of their origin. It has come about that Isis and Osiris, Bacchus and Ceres, and a host of others were made into special lawgivers whose time and purpose were determined at will. These epochs, however, adopted according to popular opinion, are far behind not only the creation of the world, but also even the flood. This guy is so good. He just did it so right. Since the form of this religion has only come to us from the times of its deterioration, it could not have been presented as anything other than a formless religion. That is so unbearably important. It's been only coming to us since the times of its deterioration, post-reset after God knows what. It is therefore in fact shrouded in all the darkness of enslavement and the abominations of sorcery, as the most fertile sources of the greatest vices, the most miserable expulsions of the mind, in the greatest disorder of the human heart. And that's what we are all feeling as we are bombarded with today's society and culture, which we know is absolute garbage, steered in the wrong direction off a cliff by demons. We can see this happening. We see the need for this to be resurrected and restored, because it's creating a darkness, and it's creating a lost sense in a lot of people. And we need to find out. This deterioration may be as great as it may be in the meantime. Nevertheless, it is not so general that one should not encounter principles in the main parts of this corrupt religion that run counter to such deterioration. Principles of a correct moral doctrine that demands a strict virtue, which is the enemy of disorder, and that anticipates a religion that is holy in its origin, in which before it was corrupted was truly holy in ways we can't even fathom. For it is not natural to believe that the purity of moral doctrine should be born of corruption and vice, rather than that it is only too natural that vice and corruption can falsify and defile the purest things. And that is what happened when these infestors came into this realm from wherever they came from beyond the poles and just destroyed everything, polluted it, and wanted to make sure that we lost our true origins and our true powers. But we will get it back. Moreover, in this religion of early paganism, there is such great diversity with the various points of faith that religion teaches us, in which anticipate a revelation. One encounters such uniformity in the worship of God with that practiced in true religion that it seems as if almost everything essential was taken from the same source, the Creator. No one can deny this distinctiveness and agreement. For example, one finds traces of the mystery of the Holy Trinity in the mysteries of Isis, in the works of Plato, and in the Indian, Japanese, and American religions. One discovers many other similar passages in pagan mythology, as I will show in due course. As far as the worship of Satan is concerned, even the church fathers have been stunned by it, since they found in it a similarity not only with the essentials of the Mosaic law, but also with all the sacraments of the Christian religion. They could give no other reason for this than to say that Satan had always pretended to be God's ape, and had allowed himself to be shown the same veneration which his worshippers offer the true God. Those who, in more recent times, dealing with the spread of the Christian religion in the East and West Indies, have demonstrated precisely this uniformity and followed the explanation of the Church Fathers. Acosta, in particular, has dealt extensively with this matter. And yeah, now Satan's everywhere, and it kind of shows what the true, what was creeping up into this world of perfection. This uniformity, together with the little knowledge we have of the earlier centuries, from which no monument of pagan antiquity remains that is not younger than the books of Moses, has led to the statement that the pagan religions founded by particular legislators were almost all taken from the Mosaic laws. And one of the greatest men of our time has carried this matter to such an extreme that he has undertaken to explain pagan mythology with regard to its historical part, as if all gods and goddesses referred to Moses and his wife Zipporah. I am well aware of the respect one owes to the character and thorough learning of the originator of this opinion, but how good in asserting that all the gods of antiquity were merely images of Moses, who himself was determined to be one of the humblest servants of the God we worship. However good, I say, his intention, and however great his supposed advantage gained thereby over unbelief, it still seems to me that this opinion provides much opportunity to attack religion, and is very helpful to atheists and those who seek to assert that religion is was merely a human invention and a political work. And that's what, again, what it seems like. It seems like this land, this realm, this is exactly it. This realm was a realm of God and the Creator. And then some satanic force or some unnatural, disgusting force, atheist force, came and has been working diligently to suck it all out. And it's not an easy task, because nature and spirit and everything, the divine, all work hand in hand. So they've had to work so hard. And who knows if they're crawling across the giant plane and just taking over realm after realm with this method. And it takes 1,000 years, but they can do that because they're on a totally different time perspective than all of us. So just, again, more to think about, because those atheists in them don't even seem human to us. For if it were true that all religions were written out of Moses, if he himself were the archetype of all their deities and the basis of all mythological fables, then it must also be true that all paganism before the time of Moses was without religion and deities. It must also be true that for a period of more than 3,000 years, the world, except for the few patriarchs from whom the chosen people sprang, lived in just the same utter vicious stupidity that pagan writers attribute to humanity before the times of Isis and Osiris, Jupiter and Juno, Cadmus and Lycrops, as when they began to appear more civilized. It would be true to say that the lawgivers after Moses' time took his example as their nemesis and exploited the weakness and ignorance of humanity to keep them in check through a servile fear of imaginary gods. Ding, ding, ding. These gods, if they all referred to Moses, would have had no advantage over any human being, and who could possibly be responsible for Moses himself not deceiving the Hebrews when it had become so easy for other pagan lawgivers to deceive the entire pagan world? And that, I've never really heard this about Moses, like being that even consideration, but to me that just sounds absolutely stupid, the absolute dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't know how people it almost seems like they were like, okay guys, this is an old book, we'll create Moses, we'll put but none of it is real. None of it has power. And people, humanity, humans sense power. They need it. They need that magic. We can immediately sense when something is dead and devoid of that energy. And that's what stories like that are, and pretty much everything we've got. And that's why I've never been able to connect with any modern religions. I've always considered myself an artist, and that is it. If this opinion were to be taken strictly, so that the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Persians, Indians, Thracians, the Germans, the Gauls, Iberians, and even the Americans, but especially the Greeks and Romans, had actually made their deities after Moses and erected their religious buildings according to the model of his religion, then nothing would be easier than to destroy them through the Holy Scriptures, and especially through the book of Moses himself. Just read them, and you will find that with all the peoples he treats, especially the Egyptians and Canaanites, with whom he mainly dealt, one will encounter an introduced religion. Indeed, one will notice there, among the very same peoples, an already corrupted and falsified religion. What did the Israelites set up before a Jew in the desert during the time when Moses conversed with God and received the Jessic from his hands? What was the golden eagle other than a symbol of Isis and one of the monstrous deities with which the Egyptians were already practicing idolatry, and by which God was also moved to lead his people out of this accursed land, where they had faced the same corruption? It was not only in Moses' time that there was a religion, and this religion had already been corrupted among the nations, but also in Abraham's time. The Chaldeans were undoubtedly infected with idolatry when God commanded him to depart from them. Perhaps the world was already in the same state at the time when God decided to flood it with the flood. My diligence, which I have devoted to pagan mythology, has opened the way for me to another system of thought. So I think that that's probably not a Jesuit. I don't think they'd be allowed to go down that route. According to which I can ascend far beyond the time of Moses and can aptly apply to our first parents, Adam and Eve, what the aforementioned author has applied to Moses and Zipporah. This system of thought, which will seem new, even though it should not be new, seems to be sufficiently supported, and although I have not carried my conjectures as far as I could, I nevertheless flatter myself that they will be found sufficiently well-founded, and other far more capable people will perhaps be better able to add others, by which mine can be further confirmed. I do not foresee that any harm could arise from this doctrine, nor that any conclusions detrimental to religion could be derived from it. For as soon as religion is discussed, I am extremely careful to bind myself so little to my opinions that I am even prepared to recant them. Therefore, I also retract in advance all those conjectures that could perhaps be misused or misinterpreted. This guy is just nailing it. However, I am so far from foreseeing anything improper in this doctrine. Rather, it seems to me that I find in it an advantage for religion, which deprives the atheist of any pretext for presenting it as a mere observation. And don't worry, buddy, we are We are carrying on your work now, in the present moment. We are keeping it alive. For if our first parents are the principal subject of pagan mythology with regard to its historical part, they are also the first progenitors and first propagators of religion. In this way, paganism, along with Holy Scripture, helps us to convince ourselves that religion comes from one and the same source. In this doctrine, one sees a religion that is pure and holy in itself and in its true origin, a religion that proceeded from God, who gave it to our first parents. In truth, there can have been no more than one religion, and since it was for human beings, it must also have had its beginning with them and exist as long as human beings exist. This is taught and demanded by both reason and faith, and I have been saying that for my entire life. There can't be all these things. There has to be one. There can be different interpretations of the one thing that are disguised differently, are created differently, that look different to our visual representations of them, but they are all coming from the same. If creation occurred, it occurred in one spectacular way, unfathomable, and that's it. Everything else that's a conjecture about that, or maybe this is wrong. And that's what we yearn for, and what we'll hopefully discover before we depart this place, or some kind of thing. In this doctrine, one notices immediately from the creation of man a religion and a public and regularly established worship service, which consists in many traditions, principles of virtue, religious observations, and customs. Just as the very concept of a religion and the circumstances of human beings certainly bring with them. Can one well imagine that human beings created as a society should have spent many centuries without public worship and without any obligations other than those imposed on each by his or her particular devotion? This is not likely, since religion is certainly the strongest bond that can contribute the most to their unity. From this doctrinal structure, which I encourage us all to kind of embrace, it will also be easy to understand how this religion, after it was given to our first parents, had to pass from generation to generation, as it were, as a kind of general inheritance to all, and thus be spread universally. Probably how universities began to spread this. It will not be possible without much effort to convince oneself that a religion that only arose many centuries after the flood, whose invention had to be attributed to a particular people, such as the Egyptians, could have spread among all peoples, and indeed without the exception of a single one, after these peoples, as they still are today, had already separated from one another, divided both in their own interests and in their inclinations, and generally more inclined to do harm to one another than to share what good they might have had in themselves. From this doctrine, it is equally easy to understand how this religion, pure and simple in its origins, could have been corrupted and changed over time, insofar as ignorance and passions are such sources that poison the best things, and from which disorder and confusion can inevitably arise. We currently encounter a true example of this in the religions of the Indians. That these are all hieroglyphic is obvious. Meanwhile, how many crude fables has not ignorance invented to explain these symbols, whose meaning has now become unknown to them? They do contain a good number of superiors that lead to a very strict moral doctrine, but what does one not find at the same time a mixture of these superiors with the most shameful corruption of morals confirmed by the examples of the deities? From this doctrinal framework, it will be very easy to explain how, despite the disruption in religion, despite the changes that have occurred among various peoples of the world, a certain agreement can nevertheless be found throughout in fables that relate to the truth, in certain points of moral teaching, and in various sacred customs that anticipate fundamental truths that are quite similar to those of true religion, and from which one can draw strong arguments against those who have silenced them. And that's where we get those good feelings. That's why we can feel when something clicks with us today, that the chosen ones who understand this stuff and are out and seeking information like this. This is all for us. We're the ones keeping it going, and feel proud, all of you out there. For even if you made it this far in the video, you are doing your part beautifully. Finally, I find another important advantage in this, namely that in the way I explain pagan mythology and symbolic theology, I trace all symbolic and hieroglyphic images to the deity and fundamental truths of our religion, but not to an explanation of the physical world, as the pagan philosophers did in the more literal times of paganism, when their explanations give way to impatience and can bring a spiteful atheist into prominence. Atheists can, indeed, advance my conjectures as novelty and say that in my explanations of pagan mythology, I have created a doctrinal system building from a material that is inherently obscure, However, this accusation of alleged novelty can be quickly refuted, as I find it founded on the authors I have cited and other probable conjectures. Although I do not present these opinions of mine as demonstrations, they are nevertheless of such a nature that they constitute quite strong proof and carry with them a certain conviction when one brings them all together from a certain perspective, which is the one we all share. But what basis do the opponents themselves have on which to build their opinions? These damn atheists. There is no prophet from known times whom they can cite as the first originator of a religion, unless one can clearly show that an established religion existed before him. Thus, there was one among the Romans, even before the time of Numa Moses, whose writings are older than any other we might have, reveals a religion in use since the beginning of the world. Therefore they are forced to seek refuge in the founders of the nations, who lived in such obscure centuries before which no definite epochs can be discerned, and who are regarded as fabulous times, of which they consequently cannot cite any real history or say anything reliable. To such founders whom the peoples regard as their first founders, and whom the ancient writers for this reason call autochthonous, that is, those who became flesh from the mud of the earth, and whom pagan antiquity presents to us symbolically in the form of half man and half snake, is this sufficient to support their opinion? Not at all. But this certainly supports mine, for these two qualities can obviously only be attributed to our first parents, as I explain it. Not only in the article on religion do I show that the American peoples regarded as barbarians really have one, but one will also encounter various strange and remarkable features in the other articles on their form of government, their marriages, their wars, their medicines, their death, mourning, and burial, so that it will seem as if formerly and in early times religion had an influence on everything. The field of morals is a vast one. It encompasses, and that's just ingrained in us, it's innate in us. It encompasses everything. It encompasses many things that are completely contradictory to one another and seem to have little connection with one another. Therefore, it has been very difficult to present them from a single perspective. The constant comparisons I make between the customs of the Americans and the customs of the ancients have increased this difficulty even further. Nevertheless, I have taken care to maintain a certain order through my classification and to bring the most important things under certain titles, as the list of my treatises suggests. But because most of the titles in themselves contain a great deal of material, I have used a certain method and connected the things in such a way that they appear in the order they must naturally have. I have connected them as one seems to flow from the other, beautifully, so that the order of the narrative would be interrupted as little as possible. I have considered it unhelpful to divide my treatise into sections and paragraphs, however, so that in the meantime the reader who is accustomed to reading the text when the time comes, if one finds it tiresome to linger in one particular place, a relief may arise. I have included a few titles in the margin which can serve to end his readings when he is tired. In the description of American customs, the comparison with the ancients has been constantly carried out, since there is not a single feature of the customs in question for which an example cannot be shown in antiquity. Ding, ding, ding. Some articles concerning the customs of the ancients accidentally provide an opportunity for a kind of treatise when what occurs in them, either obscure or peculiar, requires elaboration. Perhaps some will find one or another of these treatises too long, although I have, as far as I'm concerned, endeavored to be as brevity as possible. I have nevertheless believed that I should either not attempt to discuss a matter, or if I do, to make it as clear as possible. I also believe that if the discoveries are fascinating and new, but the conjectures and proofs are sound, one will be compensated for the length of some passages, and the length of this video. I hope you're compensated. I will begin with the article on the origin of these peoples. I am investigating here. Was America known to the ancients? How and by what means could this new world have been populated? At approximately what time did this happen, and what nations might have transplanted themselves there? Given these specific circumstances, one can of course offer nothing other than rather vague conjectures, the reasons for which I will explain. But my intention is not to examine all the barbaric peoples from one another and compare each of them with a nation known in antiquity. For whatever probable conjectures one could cite in particular, as I actually did with the example of the Iroquois and the Huron, this knowledge does not seem particularly necessary to me. It is sufficient if, in the overall analysis of American customs, one shows such a great similarity to the customs of the earliest peoples that one can conclude that they all descended from one tribe. Having outlined the mental makeup of the savages, which gives a general picture of them, I begin with the article on religion to explain their customs piece by piece. Here I examine in order the principle of their worship, what does it consist of, what is its ultimate purpose, and I conclude with an assessment of the traces of Judaism and Christianity found in them by the first inventors inventors of American mythology, is intermingled in all of this in such a way that it constitutes a complete edifice, and I believe that in it one will read with pleasure what I have to say about the symbolic theology of the heathens, about the sect of the Sabians, about the polytheists, about the worship of Vesta, about the special circumstances of sacrifices, about the servants of the gods, about the mysteries of worship, instructions for secret worship, theurgy, about prophecy, and finally about the immortality of the soul in its state after death. And if that doesn't sell you on this book, I don't know what will, but I love this book. I will let the political constitution follow religion. Of all the forms of government, the one found among the Huron and Iroquois seems to me to be the most remarkable, for this is similar to the political constitution of the ancient Cretans and Lacedaemonians, who preserved their laws and customs from early antiquity, which along the lines of longevity are very much in agreement. Although this oligarchic form of government always has something peculiar about it, this way of conducting affairs is nevertheless general in almost all states of the barbaric peoples. The nature of their national affairs, as well as their public assemblies, festivities, and dances, is almost exactly the same. Very interesting, and that's something I've never heard on any of these channels, is the connection to the Cretans and the Greeks to the America. And again, how could they not? If they're masters of the sea or masters of the ocean, how can you not make it over here? It's so stupid to think that we couldn't make it over. People have accidentally crossed the thing in like small boats, and you're telling me that ancient navies couldn't? It's just absolutely so stupid. So continuing, there's 2 pages left. Next, I will take the savages separately and deal with their marriages, feasts, and the ceremonies customary among them, their divorces, child-rearing, and youth. Religion can also benefit from this, for I believe, contrary to the claims of various writers, I can sufficiently demonstrate that at all times there have been laws that people held in honor, customs that were observed, and degrees of kinship that were forbidden. The example of Abraham, which I have cited, seems to me convincing enough to overturn the error into which pagan writers have led us when they say that it was a law among the Egyptians that brothers must marry their sisters. Stupid. I explain the cause of this error with regard to some other particular peoples and conclude by comparing the child-rearing customary among savages with what one finds in ancient times regarding the harsh upbringing of the Cretans, Lacedaemonians, and Persians, Tartarians. From there, I turn to their occupations and under this title deal with various subjects. I begin by reviewing the domestic and economic activities of men. I also discuss their villages, towns, huts, clothing, and ornaments. I then turn to the activities of women who in these countries are born to work and have to cope with the toil, the tillage, and other economic needs of subsistence. Here, too, one will encounter various features of antiquity, which will not be indifferent in their way of dressing or of pampering themselves, of painting their skin with both indelible and other fleeting colors, as well as in the first food of the ancients in the way of preparing them. To this I have added some investigations into tobacco and sugar insofar as the ancients had knowledge of them, and indicated the traces we find of them in historical records. I consider tobacco to be like symbolic of humanity. Tobacco back in the day used to have a purpose. It used to do something for you, most likely something healthy, something positive, something psychosomatic or whatever, and now it's literally just poison and garbage, the stuff that's sold and that people are consuming. It's literally just designed to kill. So what a difference. And that is very symbolic of the path of humanity that we've sadly taken since reset after reset. The activities of savages outside the home are warfare, their embassies, their trade, their hunting, and fishing. War is so extraordinarily attractive to all savages that they seem to be born and live for it alone. This is interesting. Of all their passions, this is the one they make the most of. This article is somewhat long because I also discuss their travels and all the equipment of their campaigns. I begin this subject with the motives that make war, so to speak, indispensable to them. I explain the manner in which war is celebrated and announced, along with the preparations on land or by sea. I then speak of their weapons, the order they observe on their campaigns, the caution they exercise in enemy territory, their camps, their military exercises, and the methods they employ either in the field or during sieges, attacks, or defenses. The rest deals with the return of the soldiers after victory, with their behavior toward their prisoners on the road, with the cruel welcome they receive in every village and town they arrive in, with the description of the most horrific tortures endured by those condemned to death, and with the advantages of receiving those whom it is deemed best to spare their lives. Throughout this entire article, one will notice many features of antiquity which are relevant to the diversity of the subject matter, and will seem all the more far-fetched because they come noticeably closer to the customs of the most remote times times, of which one finds only a few traces in the oldest writers. Under this number I include what I cite about the symbol of recruitment, the first type of navigation of the ancients, the knowledge of the stars, the calculation of time, the knowledge of footprints, the habit of orienting oneself to the east, and fire making, along with various other things that the reader will encounter in due course. Amazing. Of their embassies, trade, hunting, and fishing, I mention nothing more than what has something in common with antiquity, for the rest is well known enough and can be found in almost all travel descriptions. I have lingered with pleasure on a lengthy description of the so-called calumet of peace, specifically because of its comparison with Mercury's serpent's staff, and for this purpose have compiled various fragments from ancient and, in my opinion, little-known authors which will indicate a great deal of variety. So good. And this guy, again, in the war part is very interesting because you never know why would they be so obsessed with it? Why is that such a part of this realm? I don't know if it was introduced. I'd like to believe it was introduced and it was never here. And this is just that's kind of like they were put on defense because of something happening in their past that ended up creating that. And I'd like to believe that originally the true inhabitants and the true religion had nothing to do with war. And that's just a gut feeling, so hope it's right. Last page. After the necessary task comes pastimes. These are varied and consist partly of mere indulgences, partly of physical exercise. In the first order, we are dealing with games, which have given scholars the opportunity for many treatises. In the second order, however, I find some games and exercises from the spherical and gymnasium arts of the ancients. Very curious about that. Finally, the natural order compels me to treat of its illnesses, medicine, death, burial, and mourning. I divide the art of medicine for their illnesses into two parts, namely natural and unnatural, at least as it is believed to be. This very art of medicine was common in early times and was practiced by means of magic. I treat of both, and both contain something noteworthy. In particular, the lecture contains a fact from antiquity that certainly deserves attention. I'll have to find that one. But again, practice by means of magic. And to me, it seems like, the goal of coming here and colonizing this zone was to get rid of all that stuff. I can't help but feel, I think it's like the people that did it know it's a process that takes hundreds, if not thousands of years and tons of effort. And they did it. They've done it. That's why we have this weird evil part of this world that just doesn't feel like it belongs, but it's in control somehow, and it must be conquered. The article on death, burial, and mourning belongs to religion and seems to me to be a convincing proof of the impression that all nations have of the immortality of the soul. I love that, and I truly believe it. In this respect, I find the Americans far more similar to the customs of early times than in all others. Everything about it is remarkable. Their way of clothing the dead, of washing them, anointing them, of praising and mourning them, their distinct customs regarding burials, nanians, ceremonies, and funeral games, their concept of what remains in the grave after death, the duties they are accustomed to performing for their deceased, as well as the customs established for mourning. I will finally conclude this article with a general funeral feast which the Sioux Runes and Iroquois are accustomed to celebrating approximately every 12 years, during which they move their villages. This festival has something special and at the same time something remarkable about it. I conclude the entire work with a discussion of language, comparing the American languages with the learned languages and the known languages still living in Europe. I cite some words from the Huron and Iroquois languages that are found in Greek, and some other words from the barbaric language that I have gathered from ancient writers. From these I derive some conjectures with which I seek to support my opinion regarding the origin of these peoples. My stay among the Iroquois has prompted me to describe their customs in particular because I know them best and am certain of what I cite. In the meantime, one can rightly say that the customs of the savages are generally quite similar. Even if I have something special to cite about other nations, I will not omit this either. Intercourse with the Europeans has caused the savages to lose many of their ancient customs and to change their ways. Here I consider these customs and practices as they were before their change and as they inherited them from their ancestors. I could perhaps speak of these changes in another work in which I intend to treat of the introduction of Christianity among them and the efforts made by the workers of the gospel to change these savage customs and make them conform to Christian laws. Yikes. And last paragraph says, as far as the customs and practices of the ancients are concerned, I owe my knowledge to authors whose reputation is universally valid and whose works are held in high esteem everywhere. I cite them where I consider them necessary. I often add whole passages from them, either in the text itself or at the bottom of the page. I have placed some observations that seem special to me under the heading, because otherwise my narrative would have become very lengthy and formal if I had wanted to include them in the text itself. What the description and notes themselves do not sufficiently explain will be made completely clear by the attached sketches and engravings. Check my video. Perhaps my writing writing is not elegant enough, nor am I in a position to do so, for I have not taken care to select words, and I consider that this cannot be held against a missionary, especially since I have taken care to present the matter itself as clearly as possible. I therefore believe that the reader will consider my work worthy of a favorable reception, if no other error be found in it. And believe me, buddy, it has found a great, incredible audience, and we thank you for it. So thank you very much, Sigmund Jacob Baumgarten. You are the man. And this map is another one that I'll dive into in another video. And stay tuned, because I've found some really cool stuff that I am eager to share with you all, as well as the conclusion of the translation of the arts. That'll be a smaller one. The other ones will be good. But this is a great little thing. And I also recommend checking out the Tartarian Tales playlist of mine if you're new to this channel. That has so much stuff that you can find similar to stuff in this book. I always kind of dig for really cool things and interesting little things, and there's a lot that was happening in Tartaria again that you'll see was very similar to the customs in America that is pointed out in this book. And it's like what he wants. He wanted people to connect the dots. This book has made me connect a lot of the dots that we've all discovered recently, and I hope it does the same for you. So share your comments below. I love hearing from them. Share this video far and wide, and bless you all from artofdino.com and saveearth.us.